Spencer Michaels looks at the fear and anger in San Francisco's Chinatown over illegal immigrants.
Major funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. And by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world. And by New York Life, yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The group of 7 leaders opened their Tokyo summit meeting today with news of a trade agreement. Their tentative deal would completely remove tariffs on products in 8 manufacturing sectors. Tariffs would be reduced on a variety of other products. President Clinton called the agreement a breakthrough that could jumpstart world trade talks and stimulate the U.S. economy.
This really can mean an enormous number of jobs to the American people. When we came here, frankly, we did not know whether we could get an agreement on market access for manufactured goods. It is very, very good sign that the agreement was achieved, not only because of the jobs that this holds for Americans, but because of the promise it holds to actually complete the Uruguay round.
The Uruguay round is the latest stage of world trade talks which have been stalled for several years. The G7 nations must now convince about 100 other nations to return to the negotiating table. Those talks still face troublesome issues dealing with services and farm subsidies, which today's deal did not include. We'll have more on the story later in the program. Roger?
The Big 7 summit leaders also discussed informally at dinner the civil war in Bosnia today, but came up with no new ideas for ending the fighting. In Bosnia, international mediators Lord Owen and Thorvald Stoltenberg continued trying to find a solution. They met with the Croatian president today and scheduled talks with the president of Serbia. The meetings are intended to pressure the Bosnian Muslims to return to the bargaining table. Serbia and Croatia have proposed a 3-way split of Bosnia, but the Republic's Muslim president has so far refused to discuss it.
The Iraqi parliament today formally opposed a UN plan for long-term weapons inspections. The Speaker of the Parliament said Iraq would not allow the UN to mount surveillance cameras at its missile sites unless the UN offered something in return, but he was not specific. In New York, Iraqi and United Nations officials began a new round of talks on a one-time $1.6 billion sale of Iraqi oil. Most of the proceeds from the proposed UN-monitored sale would be used by Iraq to buy food. An oil embargo was imposed on Iraq after its 1990 invasion of Kuwait, and any lifting of it must be approved by the Security Council.
Along the Mississippi River today, there was more of everything. More rain, more flooding, and more overrun sandbags. Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri have been hardest hit. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from their homes, and at least 15 deaths have been reported by the Associated Press. Officials at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, said today they will soon begin providing disaster relief. Some towns where the river crested earlier this week have been warned that it may crest again. We'll have more on the story right after the news summary. While rain was stuck over the Midwest, a blistering heat wave wilted much of the eastern U.S. Temperatures broke records across the region, reaching the 90s as far north as Maine. Meanwhile, a hurricane named Calvin swirled up the Pacific coast of Mexico. Winds of more than 100 miles an hour lashed resorts and other towns along the coast. Inland, heavy rains filled the streets and swept away dozens of homes. At least 28 deaths have been attributed to the storm. Forecasters expect Calvin to move slowly northward.
That's our summary of the top stories in the news. Now it's on to Mississippi flooding, the Tokyo trade deal, and new fears in San Francisco's Chinatown.
The continued flooding of the Mississippi River is our lead segment tonight. As reported, the rain-swollen river continues to surge above flood stages in Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. A federal disaster has already been declared in Wisconsin. Losses from crops alone in the upper Midwest are estimated at a minimum of $1 billion. Volunteers, National Guard troops, and even convicts have been called out to fight the river along a 300-mile stretch from Dubuque to St. Louis. We'll hear from the National Weather Service and the Army Corps of Engineers, but first this report from Elizabeth Brackett, who has been on the scene in West Alton, Missouri.
Ray Meekins, his son, and neighbors are just trying to stay even with the Mississippi today.
We're not going to hold it out. We have to save the levee break
where we want it to break. This levee breaks where we don't want it to break. It may never be fixed.
So you think these sandbags will help protect the levee as best as can?
This will raise the spots up. It's going to break where we want it to. That's all we're doing today.
The Meekins family has been watching over the 2.5-mile-long levee that protects the tiny farming community of West Alton, Missouri for the past 3 generations. 800 people depend on this earthen levee to keep the Mississippi off of their farmland and out of their homes. Homes in front of the levee are already gone. To protect those behind the levee, the Meekins have been sandbagging for weeks. But last night, Meekins and others made the decision to call off the sandbagging efforts. They knew then there was no way to stop the rising water.
There's no sense taking a chance. We had 8-10 boats running, a lot of people on the levee and everything. And, you know, when you get to a point where you're just wasting time and you're taking a chance of somebody drowning or somebody getting hurt, you know, you're better off to pull off. This way we had a little time to warn the people in town to get out, you know, more time to evacuate. If you fight right to the end, the levee blows out. Nobody's got time to get out. So you have people on the levee and they have trouble getting them off.
The Meekins are now facing what thousands of river residents have faced along the 400-mile stretch from Minnesota to Missouri. Millions of dollars in property and farmland has been destroyed by the highest water on the Mississippi in the last 30 years. All river traffic has been stopped along the busy commercial river, costing barging companies in excess of $1 million a day. Governors all along the river have called for emergency help. Yesterday, it was the Missouri governor's turn.
The Guard is coming out to help in several different instances. We have the State Emergency Management is coordinating activities here. We are accelerating the process for a federal declaration of disaster, and we will be doing that assessment tomorrow and getting that to Washington just within literally hours.
Ray Meekins heard his governor's plea for help. He wishes the government had acted 2 years ago, when he and his neighbors were trying to raise the levee another 2 feet.
We passed bond issue, you know, a bond levy, and we've got the money. Sure, we got the money a year ago in December. You know when we finally got our 404 permit from the federal government because of all the bureaucracy and the fish and wildlife, the FEMA people, mostly FEMA people, we got a permit about 3 weeks ago.
There's good reason for the Mackin family to pay such close attention to the levee. If it goes, they lose 1,200 acres of newly planted farmland to the river. The Meekins family first settled this rich land in the late 1800s. It was last underwater in the 1973 floods. There is no way, says Meekins, to recoup devastating flood losses.
We are going to lose it all. There's no doubt about it, yeah. It's just, you know, it's under a lot of it's under seawater now, but the part that isn't, as soon as this levee breaks, it's going to be under about 10 foot of water. And the levee's going to go sometime in the next couple of days because they still got 2 or 3 feet of water coming. You can tell we're right on top of the levee.
And will there be any insurance? Will there be any government money to protect you from that loss?
Not that I know of.
Ray Meekins' son Gary and his wife Elizabeth are now in the family home about a half-mile behind the levee. Today they were frantically carrying out furniture, knowing that the levee could no longer help.
I just want to make sure we get everything out before the roads get blocked off where we can't pass through. That's once I get my furniture out, I'm not going to worry. Well, I mean, I'm past the point of worrying. I'm devastated, so. But I have my good times, my bad times, and I have a strong time right now, so I can talk about it, so.
Is this one of the toughest things you've ever tried to go through?
Oh, definitely, definitely, yeah.
What do you think about farm life at the moment?
I say it's got its ups and it's got its ups and downs. Farming is a gamble. This is a little extreme of a gamble. I still wouldn't give it up no matter what. It's the best place to raise a family. It's just, it's not going to be a very profitable place this year. No.
It will be a long night for the Meekins. They can only wait and worry as the water continues to rise. Though some here have decided to stop worrying and take advantage of the great flood of 1993.
For more on the story now, we're joined by Robert Landis, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and Brigadier General Stanley Janiga, who is the Director of Civil Works for the Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Landis, when's it going to end, the rain?
Well, Roger, I'd like to tell you it's going to end soon, but from what we're seeing from our numerical models of the atmosphere, there's no end in sight right at the present time. right on out through the next month, it looks like we're going to have this pattern that we now have in the atmosphere.
You're kidding. A month?
Could be as much as a month, yes.
But there's got to be an end, though, doesn't there?
It'll end, but it's going to take some catastrophic type of weather event, either a new center of energy coming in through the northwest westerlies or a hurricane perhaps along the east coast would break it down.
So how does a rain cell of that size get stuck over one section of the country for so long?
It's actually a series of cells. There's a little low pressure area in the upper atmosphere, and there are little wavelets that are revolving around it. And what happens is it releases energy, and with all the warm, moist, unstable air that's moving up from the Gulf of Mexico, it continually sets off all these thunderstorms. So it's a series of these wavelets that move around a big pressure area, a low pressure area in the upper atmosphere.
Well, if I understand you correctly, you're predicting more rain for a month in the same quantities that we've had out there for the last 3 or 4 weeks?
The pattern is such that these kinds of little wavelets will continue to come through, the warm air will continue to push northward, and right now we can't see how that system is going to break down at the present time with the knowledge that we now have.
But I mean, can the Mississippi Valley sustain that kind of water?
I doubt that obviously at this point in time, everything we add to it is just going to build on the crests that we now have in the northern Mississippi.
Oh, has it been the amount of rain or the length during which the rain has been falling that makes it so dangerous?
It's a little bit of both, more of the former in the fact that this situation started to set up near the end of March and has continued pretty much since that period of time. And we've had lots and lots of rain during that period of time and basically no relief. And until the atmosphere decides it's going to break down this major system, we're going to continue to have this kind of weather and more rain in the Midwest.
General Janiga, tell me whether the civil engineers' system of flood and water control is designed to withstand such an assault as the Midwest is now going through.
No, it is not. By and large, it is not.
Yeah.
What you're seeing here is a relatively rare event. In fact, it has something less than a 1% chance of occurring. And so in many places, we are not designed to handle this severe an event. In other cases, we are. St. Louis, for example, is handling the event and should handle the crest very well, but in many cases, it will not.
All day long, reading the stories from the wires, there are constant references to Davenport, Iowa, not having a seawall. Can't you talk Davenport, Iowa into having a seawall? Why don't they have a seawall?
Basically, the government of Davenport, Iowa, elected not to pursue a project. One of the requirements of flood control projects is cost sharing. That is 75% of the dollars that go to construct that project are federal dollars and 25% come from a local entity, for example, a municipal government. They chose not to make that commitment a few years ago and therefore do not have a project today.
The explanation was that the riverfront is so important to Davenport with the gambling casinos and tourists and the river cruises that they get more revenue by not having a seawall than they would sustain losses with having one. Do you think that's good public policy?
Well, it's good public policy if we do what the local government wants.
Is that right?
In this case, we did what the local government wanted. In my judgment, it's good public policy. We do have ways of addressing the aesthetics, and that are with some movable sections of walls, which are moved in place when they're needed for protection. So we can address, at least in part, the aesthetic question.
Barge traffic is now closed on the Mississippi from, I think it's East Dubuque down to St. Louis.
That's correct.
What's the danger of the barge traffic, General?
Basically, you can describe the Mississippi right now as a road with no traffic signs or traffic lights on it. All of those traffic control items, such as buoys and markers put in by the Coast Guard, have been washed away. So it's a safety issue that the Coast Guard has closed that waterway.
And the same thing is true on the Missouri River. I understand that.
That's correct.
Is there danger to the levee system with barges going by? Is that a consideration?
It is a consideration from the standpoint that wakes might cause more erosion, but at this point in time, that's not an issue.
What's a levee built of, General?
Generally speaking, it's built of earth. various gradations of earth
Yeah.
put together in an engineeringly sound fashion.
And generally, how high above flood stage do you build a levee?
That depends on the particular project, and it varies in each case, and varies on the engineering feasibility, the environmental aspects of the project, and then the economics of the project. In some cases, how much the local sponsor is willing to invest in that project. So it varies dramatically, and I'd have to look at a place on the map to answer that question specifically.
Mr. Landis, it's unusual, is it not, to have such a massive rain during the summer? I thought the big rains and the floods came in March and April. Why in June and July?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Usually we're concerned about spring flooding along the Mississippi. In fact, even this year we didn't have a big snowpack. We didn't think we would have flooding. This weather pattern that has set this up basically was formed out over the Pacific Ocean 3, 6, 9 months ago. And one of the things we're trying to understand is the physics of the atmosphere and the energy coming out of the ocean that sets these kinds of things up in terms of the size of the large high-pressure area that's causing part of this problem over the East Coast, and the amounts of water that basically are being put into the atmosphere from the Gulf of Mexico and being allowed to fall out because of these little wavelets.
But in terms of economic loss, what's the difference between having the floods in March and April and having them in June and July, agricultural loss?
Usually the March and spring floods happen much more rapidly. They don't build up a long period of time. We don't have the saturated earth over such a big area. The other problem with this, not only the duration, is the area in which has been covered, the whole northern part of the Mississippi Valley, for instance.
What's the capacity of the Mississippi River, say south of St. Louis, to absorb all those tributaries, the Des Moines River, the Missouri River, the Skunk River, the Turkey River, the Illinois River? Can the Mississippi down south take it all?
Right now, I think we're looking at perhaps a million cubic feet per second to go past Memphis. Normally, we don't get major flooding, for instance, in Memphis, which is south of there, until we get about 1.3 million cubic feet. So we still have some space. The Mississippi gets much wider as it moves further south, and we're not looking at any major flooding, basically, once we get south of Illinois.
No danger from the Arkansas River or anything below that?
No.
General, along the Mississippi, the big cities, as I read the map, are Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis, Memphis, New Orleans.
Yes.
I would insult others that I didn't mention, but those are the big ones. Do they all have seawalls?
They have some form of levee protection. May well be earth. There are some concrete walls put in place, but there's some measure of protection in each of those cities.
And you mentioned that St. Louis, you thought, would be able to handle most anything that the Mississippi sent down. Is that, how so?
Based on current projections. They can handle an elevation of water at about 54 feet there. And right now we're projecting that it'll crest somewhere in the 43, 44 foot range based on current weather projections.
Would you stick with that after hearing Mr. Landis's prediction of another month of rain?
Based on the specifics that he's been able to give me so far, I would stick with that. We do very close coordination with them, as you might imagine, to make sure we know how much rainfall is going to come.
Right. Just my final question. How do you compare the flood of '93 to the past history of the Mississippi flooding? The big one in '73, big one in '65. How does this one stack up?
This one stacks up in that we're now breaking most of the records. I think the big difference is the area, that this is much larger in area and extent, particularly along the northern part of the Mississippi Valley. That's the big difference between this flood and the floods of '73 and '65.
And General, a final question. What's the greatest danger for a person living in the flood area? What should you not do, first of all?
The greatest danger is not to remain there during the flooding, is to evacuate it in accordance with the evacuation plans that many of the local governments have, and literally to get out of the way of the water, as you saw in your previous news report.
And not drive a car through what you think is shallow water.
That's correct.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you, Mr. Landis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin?
Roger.
Still ahead on the NewsHour, the Tokyo trade deal and Chinatown's fears about illegal immigrants. We go next tonight to today's trade deal in Tokyo, described by the U.S. negotiator as the biggest tariff cut in history. It's the agreement of the world's largest trading partners to reduce or eliminate import duties on a broad range of manufactured goods. So far, it's the one accomplishment of the economic summit, now in its second day in Tokyo. In a moment, we'll appraise the trade agreement and other developments. First, this backgrounder from Steve Levinson of Independent Television News in London.
The G7 leaders arrived for their annual summit knowing that in the past their meetings have been good on talk but bad on action. To a sceptical world, these summits have become disappointing jamborees, welcome only to political leaders trying to escape trouble at home. But as they were shepherded to their customary photo call, they had reason to celebrate. Only hours earlier, a deal had been struck to eliminate many of the trade barriers between them, lowering or scrapping tariffs on products ranging from whiskey to building equipment. The deal was concluded by trade ministers meeting at a Tokyo hotel. The hope is it will kickstart the stalled Uruguay round of trade talks at GATT, involving another 100 countries.
The breakthrough achieved today in the international trade talks is good news for America and good news for the world. It means more jobs and higher incomes for our people. While there are difficult negotiations ahead, today's agreement on manufactured goods breaks the logjam in the Uruguay round.
The leaders know they have to sell tariff reductions to suspicious audiences at home who want many traditional industries protected. President Clinton stressed a GATT deal could create 1.4 million jobs in the US. World trade has grown fivefold since GATT, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, was founded 45 years ago to bring down barriers between countries. The current GATT round started in Uruguay in 1986 and was to be completed in 4 years. But when ministers met in Brussels in 1990, the deadline had passed and a deal was as far away as ever. A year later, hopes rose when the then GATT chief published a draft agreement. But his proposals on farm subsidies were rejected by the EC. Later, talks between the community and the US produced a partial farm deal. But as farmers rioted outside the EC headquarters, the French snubbed the deal. A new GATT deal was set when President Clinton took office, amid fears of more protectionism. Today's preliminary agreement covers some areas of trade, but still leaves others to be concluded by this December, the latest deadline. A deal on farm subsidies still needs to be pulled together, especially as the French government remains uncommitted to it. Tariffs on imports of textiles from developing countries also remain a problem. Even so, hopes of a GATT deal seem genuinely brighter. The summit leaders now have other economic issues to tackle: recession in the industrial world and perhaps even more urgent, poverty and debt in the developing world. The poorest nations of Africa have listened to pious summit declarations for years, but they're still drowning in debt. Once again, their plight is on the agenda. Despite numerous debt rescheduling programs and aid packages, it's estimated they still owe over $180 billion. A quarter of their hard-won export earnings go in merely paying interest on these debts.
People of Africa are looking to the G7 leaders to take an initiative to relieve the huge debts that they owe to the rich world. Many African countries owe more than they earn. Countries like Ethiopia are using all the earnings that they earn from selling their commodities on international markets to pay off their debts. Africa as a whole uses 109% of GMP to pay off its debts, and countries like Mozambique owe more than 3 times they would earn in a particular year. So there's no way that African countries emerging from years of conflict can recover unless the international community relieves some of that debt burden.
Poverty in the third world is still to be discussed, but the message tonight is so far so good.
For more on today's trade agreement and the Tokyo summit, we turn to Robert Hormats, Vice Chairman of Goldman Sachs International, a New York investment firm. He served in a variety of economic policy positions in 4 administrations. And Walter Russell Mead, contributing editor at Harper's Magazine and senior advisor to the World Policy Institute at the New School for Social Research in New York. He joins us from New Orleans. Bob Hormats, President Clinton is hailing this as a breakthrough. Is that an apt term?
It is a breakthrough. It breathes new life into the Uruguay round of trade negotiations. Without this, I think those negotiations would have been in deep trouble. This doesn't guarantee success, but it builds some momentum. Now they have to go on and get the other members of the GATT to agree. They have to move on to agriculture and to services, and those are very tough issues.
Mr. Mead, do you see it as a breakthrough?
No, I see this. It would have been a breakthrough in a negative sense if they had failed to get an agreement on this. But this is really the absolute minimum that they had to have here. So GATT has stayed alive, but it hadn't really made a great leap forward.
But is it fair to say that they're using this term either jumpstart or kickstart these talks? Has it at least achieved that?
No, I think there's so much wishful thinking about this GATT process and about the global economy in general. You know, every one of these 7 leaders is coming from a domestic economy that's in terrible trouble. None of them, as far as I can see, have a real clue what to do about it. And so there's a lot of clutching at straws.
Well, you feel more optimistic about it than Mr. Meade does.
Well, it depends what word you want to use. Had they not agreed, the negotiations would have been in trouble. This doesn't guarantee progress on agriculture or services, and it doesn't guarantee progress in dealing with these enormous structural problems that all the Western economies have. Very high rates of unemployment. In Western Europe, they're facing high interest rates, high labor costs, which are bringing down those economies. So there are a lot of other problems.
Those are the things that President Clinton addressed in the speech on the West Coast on his way there, and said he was going to call ministers and experts from all these countries to a meeting in the fall to address.
That's very important, because those are bigger issues in the long run.
But would you both agree what it does do is rescues the GATT talks from absolute failure?
Absolutely.
And collapse. Would you agree with that, Mr. Meade?
Well, I'd say, yeah, that, you know, the heroin has been pulled off the railroad tracks another time, just as the train was coming roaring through. But this isn't the end of this movie yet.
Mickey Cantor, the trade representative, said in a briefing that this was the result of the president's strategy, Mr. Clinton's strategy, to force progress by taking up the market access issue first. In other words, the easier of the various sectors. Do you credit Mr. Clinton with having sort of got this off zero? Mr. Meade?
Well, I think he's
done his initiative that's done this, in other words.
I think he wasn't the only one of these 7 leaders who understood that there had to be an agreement here. I tend to agree with Bob. I give him a lot more credit for calling for the Jobs Summit. I think that's the real new step here. That's the one sense you've got that somebody at this Global Economic Summit has some idea what the real problems that real economies are facing.
How much credit does President Clinton deserve for this amount of movement? I mean, obviously his people are out there briefing the press like mad, and the president himself, which is very unusual at one of these economic summits, came into the briefing room, and, well, you saw an excerpt from it earlier in the program. I mean, how much of this is his initiative?
Well, all these summits really are domestic politics played out on a global stage, and each of these leaders is clearly going to take some credit for the progress, but I think the president does deserve considerable progress. And Mickey Cantor, they pushed very hard on this. I think the Japanese helped, the Europeans. It was a joint effort. There are a number of parties that need to get the credit and should get the credit.
Mickey Cantor quoted a projection by DRI, which is the largest private economic forecasting company in this country, that the effects of the Uruguay round, and President Clinton just repeated it, would mean 1.4 billion jobs in 10 years. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean if everything in the Uruguay round by December were concluded successfully, we'd get another 1.4 billion jobs?
I wish I had the courage to make such a precise prediction about what's going to happen 10 years from now. It's very hard to know. We really can't judge the results of the Uruguay round. We don't know what the final round is going to look like. Yeah. And to make these long-term judgments, it's a bit of wishful thinking. It should create jobs in some sectors, farm equipment, pharmaceuticals, construction equipment, some of the areas where we will get increased exports, but some sectors will be subject to greater import competition. So the net effect, who knows?
What do you think about that projection, Mr. Meade?
Well, I think I'm pretty suspicious also of these long-term projections. I mean, you know, if DRI is so smart, what's the stock market going to do tomorrow? And you get economists who really can't make a quarter-to-quarter forecast, who with just immense confidence come out and tell you, well, 10.7 years from now, we're going to have 1.683 million new jobs. It's just not very credible.
I noticed that Prime Minister, excuse me interrupting you, I noticed that Prime Minister Major picked up on that, and he said that this deal would mean 475,000 new jobs over 10 years in Britain. Maybe Mr. Clinton had slipped him the same DRI projection?
It's amazing how only the optimistic projections ever seem to get used in these scenarios. But I think it's, more troubling in a way, and really bring us back to this issue of unemployment, is that free trade theory really teaches you that in order to have the general benefits of free trade, you've got to have full employment in the free trading countries. And when you have structural unemployment in Europe and structural unemployment in the United States, and then mass underemployment and unemployment in developing countries, you really don't have the ingredients for the kind of growth that people are hoping that GATT's going to deliver. And you've got to do something about this structural unemployment, or the whole GATT initiative is, I think, going to run the risk of falling apart.
Are you saying that the GATT talks could be wildly successful by the most optimistic projections, and that everybody could get everything he wants, and it would still not create a lot of new jobs around the world and a lot of growth?
That's very possible. That's very possible. The reason is that if you look at what's wrong with the world economy today, a lot of it doesn't have to do with barriers to trade. In fact, even without the Uruguay round, barriers to trade are now lower than really they've ever been in human history. This is sort of an icing on the cake of a process that's been going on almost 50 years.
Do you agree with that, Bob Hormats, that even if the Uruguay round, which everybody's been saying for several years, if it failed, it would be a disaster because it would start up all sorts of new protectionism, that even if it's as successful as it possibly could be, it's not going to make that much difference?
It really will make a difference in certain sectors, but overall there are deeper problems at hand that have to be dealt with. You can liberalize the trading system, and that should create jobs in a lot of countries, but the difficulty in many countries is that their labor prices, their product prices are very high. They won't be able to benefit from the new competitive opportunities. In the U.S., for instance, we have to deal with our structural unemployment problem, much as Europe has to. We have to deal with education, training, new capital formation, avoid regulations which are disincentives to companies to hire people, avoid things like raising the capital gains tax, which is a disincentive to capital formation. We have to deal with a lot of domestic problems so that we can take advantage of new trading opportunities in the global market.
Well, let's go back to the question I just, or the item I just referred to, that everybody's been saying. I've heard you say it, as a matter of fact, that if the GATT talks failed, the results would be so negative that it would mean not only no growth, but perhaps less than no growth. Just elaborate on that a little bit.
And the reason for that is because the global economy could fragment. If you don't have one central system of rules and obligations, commitment to non-discrimination, then individual countries could decide they want to take unilateral action, restricting imports, making discriminatory bilateral deals. There could be more protectionist regionalism, with one region excluding the products of another from its markets. All these things could worsen the situation in the world economy, which is in precarious state today. It would be in a much more precarious state if we had global protectionism, which we had in the 1930s.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Mead? That
well, I agree in the sense that the defeat of, if the Uruguay round collapses, we do have a real psychological problem. But I think if you could have the Uruguay round go through and everybody swear. We had a treaty in, 1929 to outlaw war forever, and the Uruguay round could be a paper treaty like this, because if the economic conditions are bad and you have a lot of domestic unemployment in a lot of countries, democratic leaders are going to say, well, I really would much rather have voters in somebody else's country be unemployed, and countries like France or other countries, including the United States, will be forced for domestic political reasons, whatever GATT says, whatever the Uruguay round says, to go protectionist. Well, to me, free trade is in a sense a result of prosperity rather than a cause of prosperity.
Well, let's take a specific example in the United States. The U.S. agreed today, under the list of what wasn't done, the U.S. agreed to consider reducing its high tariffs on textiles, but only if other negotiating partners meet a variety of conditions. Now, that's politically a very sensitive issue in this country and could result in a lot of unemployment in this country at a time when there's already high unemployment. Is it likely in this atmosphere that the U.S. could agree to, could it get enough from the others to justify politically reducing its tariffs on textile imports?
Well, this is where the growth issue is so important, because if the economy is growing quickly and new jobs are being created, then you have a climate in which people are going to say, okay, maybe if I lose this job, I can go out and find another job that's as good, who knows, maybe even better. But in this kind of stagnant economic climate we've seen here for so long, and really let's not forget, after a generation in which the average American working family has seen its hourly real wages decline against inflation, in this kind of a mood, people are very defensive, and they remember that all these experts now talking about these new millions of new GATT jobs were singing for George Bush just a few years ago about the millions of jobs he would create, and on and on and on. So you've really got to, without growth, you will not have, for any long period of time, a political commitment to free trade. And I agree, if you lose that commitment to free trade, you can make a bad situation worse.
Bob Hormats, let's take another example which is sensitive in these talks, but very important to the U.S. because it's a world leader in things like the new technologies and service industries and knowledge-based industries. Knowledge-based industries. That was not approached. They said, counters said that they made some progress towards that, but describe why that is so difficult and how important that is, and why the other countries are resisting it.
There are three difficult areas: agriculture, textiles, and services. Services, in many ways, is the most complicated because it goes to the heart of domestic regulations, telecommunications industries, financial service industries, insurance, accounting. All these things have, in the past, not been in the realm of international negotiations, and it's a new subject. Many countries want to protect these industries in part because they employ a lot of people. A large portion of this workforce here is employed in this sector. And second, we're not getting much from other countries. Many of these developing countries want to protect their service industries against the highly developed American telecommunications sector or banking sector. So it is a very tough area and a very new area, and we really don't have a lot of negotiating history. That's part of the problem.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Meade in New Orleans, and Bob Hormats here. We have to leave it there. Tomorrow, Russian President Boris Yeltsin will press his case at the economic summit. His attempts to revamp his country's economy have been based in part on pledges of financial help from the G7, but that money has been slow in coming. Ian Williams of Independent Television News reports on the frustration that has produced in Moscow.
The General Director was a little nervous as he prepared to address the first shareholders meeting of the Expo Stroymash company, which was privatized in February. Comrade shareholders, welcome, he began. Several hundred of them, mostly workers and their relatives, looked on. Later, they re-elected their boss to his job. The Moscow-based company makes hydraulic parts and sells them to Central Europe for half the price of similar products from the West. It's one of 70,000 Russian companies which have been or are being privatized and which employ a third of Russia's workforce. This is being held up as the most important element of the government's reform program. But the most painful part, the restructuring of these companies, involving bankruptcies and large-scale unemployment, has yet to come. And the minister in charge of privatization is angry because the G7 countries are backtracking on a promise to provide $4 billion to help cushion the impact of this.
I think that we already lose a lot of time, and I think that Russian people remember the promises from the West in 1992, the promises which will not be fulfilled. So that's why I think it's extremely important in the Tokyo summit to have real visible results, and one of them is the creation of the privatization fund.
A view echoed by the senior British economic advisor to the Russian government.
Well, I think that now the West has got to put its money on the table. There's been a great deal of talk, but now there is a solid basis for progress in Russia. Inflation is coming under control, provided the West helps. Restructuring is beginning. The privatization is the most rapid privatization in human history. The West shouldn't just say they believe in it. They should put the money in to make sure the privatization succeeds.
Before Boris Yeltsin's referendum victory in April, the West pledged $43 billion of aid to Russia in a bid to boost the president's position. Half of this is debt relief, not new money though. And new credits are conditional on Russia controlling its runaway inflation. The government argues it is doing just that. Over the past fortnight, the ruble has strengthened to a little over 1,000 against the dollar. Inflation is down to 20% per month, and ministers claim to have tamed the central bank, persuading it to stop printing money to bail out inefficient companies. This has led Russia's finance minister to boast that his country has fulfilled its side of the bargain. He says Yeltsin will be tough in Tokyo on Western promises of aid and on opening markets to Russian goods.
If our exporters could trade in favorable conditions, we might not need any state credits at all, and our president will be very clear about that.
Not everybody shares the government's optimism about the economy, though. Critics say the apparent stabilization is a result of seasonal factors, not government policy. And they predict a further sharp downturn in output and the onset of mass unemployment in the autumn. The powerful Industrialists' Union has warned that large industries, including the country's major steel mills, will collapse without generous government credits. And liberal economists agree the really hard decisions still lie ahead.
We did not start even structural reforms. You could hardly find the unemployment, bankruptcy, restructuring on the economy. The decline we have, it is not just structural decline, it's an overall decline.
Another sign of the new Russian economy this week, the first Rolls-Royce dealer in Moscow takes delivery of his first cars. He's convinced the cars, which sell for £120,000 each, will find ready buyers among Russia's new entrepreneurs. For others, among them Western financial officials in Moscow, it's further evidence of the new and conspicuous wealth of a minority officials believe are shifting money abroad in quantities that dwarf any G7 aid.
Next tonight, fear and anger in San Francisco's Chinatown. Today, the Coast Guard reported that it had found about 650 illegal Chinese immigrants in 3 freighters south of San Diego off the Mexican coast. In the past 6 months, the U.S. has seized more than a dozen ships carrying illegal Chinese immigrants. The news of these incidents has sparked fears of a backlash among the Chinese in San Francisco. Correspondent Spencer Michaels of KQED reports.
Many members of San Francisco's more than a century-old Chinese community resent and fear the public outcry over illegal immigrants from China. Aware of past discrimination, they're afraid the smugglers are giving them a black eye. Social Services Agency head Annie Chung.
Like people looked at us as if all Chinese or all immigrants are illegal aliens, that we come here and we took over jobs that other American citizens should be having, or we're looked upon that we live off the welfare system. But people don't understand that the illegal aliens are a very, very, very small percentage.
No one knows the exact number of illegal Chinese immigrants in this country, but some estimates are as high as 100,000 a year. A nationwide debate on immigration was touched off recently by several incidents. In May and June, hundreds of smuggled immigrants disembarking in California were captured and detained, though some escaped. The Immigration and Naturalization Service went looking for more boats full of illegals, fearing a massive invasion. A few days later in New York, a boatload of such immigrants from Fujian province, China, was discovered trying to offload. 8 immigrants drowned off Long Island and 300 others made it to shore and capture. They immediately applied for political asylum. The INS says nearly all those caught on both coasts are young men who had been living in horrible conditions at sea, the victims of unscrupulous smugglers.
I wish the American public could see one of these ships. It was horrible. No bathrooms, no cooking facilities, no portholes for air. You wonder why people would subject themselves to those conditions.
David Ilkert is the San Francisco District Director for the INS, which has been aggressive in trying to stop the waterborne illegals.
One of these days, one of these ships is going to wind up in the bottom. The only evidence that there was a ship in that area will be the crew bobbing up and down in the ocean on lifeboats. And everybody will be asking the Immigration Service, what are you doing about stopping this carnage?
Chinese Americans agree with the INS on one point. The smugglers are parasites who should be caught and punished. Rose Pack, an official of San Francisco's Chinese Chamber of Commerce, has no sympathy with them.
I think those people should be prosecuted.
The smugglers?
The smugglers. There's no doubt about it. They're endangering people's lives.
Professor Lin Chi Wang thinks the INS has gone overboard. He teaches Asian American Studies at the University of California at Berkeley. In his view, both the American and the Chinese American communities have panicked over the smuggling incidents.
The real reason why Chinese Americans are so hostile to this whole thing is that they're afraid. I mean, based on their 100 years of experience in America, they're afraid of a racist backlash, and that's why they're going out of their way to attack the smuggler, to urge our government to do the vigorous enforcement against these people. I'm all for enforcement, but there's no need to get panic.
Professor Wang points out that a relatively small number of illegal Chinese immigrants has been apprehended. These teenagers caught trying to enter the U.S. were released to a Presbyterian mission in San Francisco and then to foster homes.
I think that we are making a mountain out of a molehill because, in the last 6 months, only 1,700 so-called illegal Chinese or undocumented Chinese workers have been apprehended. And when you compare that number with, the number of, let's say, Mexicans or Canadians that are getting apprehended every day, that's nothing. We know for a fact that about 3,300 Mexicans were apprehended and deported every day.
56,000 Chinese were admitted legally to the United States in 1990, and each year the number increases. While many Chinese Americans sympathize with the immigrants, they are not eager for more. Po Wang is head of the Chinese Newcomers Service Center in San Francisco.
The community is not ready even for the influx of legal immigrants looking for housing, looking for work, looking for other social services, health services. And then how can we help another great number of illegal immigrants?
Many Chinese Americans say the press is full of misinformation about illegals. They charge the press perpetuates the notion that illegal Chinese immigrants have below minimum wage jobs waiting for them. In Chinatown, that idea is usually dismissed because jobs are hard to get. 11,000 new arrivals came through this agency last year looking for work. Only 2% were placed. For legals or illegals, these are tough times.
Job opportunities are very limited. Only today's newspaper, if you check closely, a lot of restaurant business are for sale. Now, these restaurants usually are contact for employment.
Are there any ads in this paper for help wanted, for that kind of thing?
Not too many.
Wang, like many in Chinatown, wants to publicly discourage illegal immigration.
If we have these illegal job seekers competing, then it might jeopardize some of the chances of the legal immigrants looking for work.
You put this as might and perhaps,
yes.
But does it happen here? Are the people you are sending out for jobs in competition with illegals who will work for less?
We don't hear about that.
Frequently, low-paying restaurants are mentioned as spots where thousands of illegal immigrants find work, often in New York or San Francisco's Chinatowns. Rose Pack considers that idea ludicrous. She says there aren't enough restaurants.
It just doesn't add up. Can you imagine here in Chinatown, all of a sudden one morning we go in, all of our restaurant helps have been replaced by those people that came on the boats? It just doesn't make sense at all.
Do you have illegal people at a restaurant like this?
No, sir. I don't think so. Everybody like that, no, because my restaurant all legal.
If an illegal immigrant comes to you for a job, what do you say?
I can accept.
The other place illegal immigrants are rumored to find work is in the sweatshops of Chinatown, the crowded, low-paying sewing and garment factories that usually operate behind closed doors.
Some of them are probably working in the sweatshops. To my knowledge, most of the people who are coming over in those boats are men, and the garment industry is mostly women workers. So you don't find that many of the boat people in garment factories.
Katie Kwan heads the San Francisco office of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which has had a hard time organizing the sweatshops.
In New York City, where the Fujianese population is bigger, you find more Fujianese boat people in the garment industry.
Kwan fears the smuggling incidents will hurt not just the boat people.
Unfortunately, it's going to lead to some anti-immigrant kind of feelings coming out, and we've seen the hysteria that can develop against immigrants can lead to some mighty ugly racist incidents.
Immigrants, whatever their legal status, also usually face bleak living conditions when they arrive in Chinatown. The buildings here are old, the halls are grungy, and the rooms are tiny. Most of these cubicles are occupied by elderly Chinese, some of them cared for by Self-Help for the Elderly, Annie Chung's agency.
It's very typical that a low-income immigrant will be living in that type of housing for a period of time. I think that they're thinking that America is a land of opportunity, and I'm sure people told you that they think they're coming to a gold mountain, which means there are lots of opportunities to make money in America. That's why they risk their life to come here.
31-year-old Tian Su Lee entered the U.S. legally a few months ago to join his wife. Trained as a cook and an auto mechanic, he has been unable to find a job.
Nothing to do, is really anxious to look for a job, but nothing to do, hang around all day long, is kind of feel uncomfortable when you're used to working all day long.
If this is the American dream, then we've really destroyed it and lost something. But you know, I think that most people who come don't come for themselves. They know that they're going to have to work in places like this, and that they're going to have to live a very bitterly hard life for the rest of their lives. But I think it's for their children.
Of more immediate concern to the Chinese Americans in San Francisco is the allegation that the community aided the smugglers and, by implication, encourages illegal immigration. That charge came from INS District Director David Ilkert.
Did you say that? I said that, and I don't retract that statement, quite frankly. Use your common sense. I mean, you've got these operations. The ship comes into a bay, right? Can tie up at a deserted pier. Right. The support services are available to move them from the area to where they're going, right? I mean, that takes people, a lot of people, and people talk. And I can't believe that there aren't people in the community that know what's going on, or have some reason to suspect something's going on, and I would hope they would share that information. Have they? Well, I'm not at liberty to discuss at this time.
I think that's really outrageous, and I think it's really very racist for him to be making that kind of an irresponsible statement. We don't know anything better. You know, in fact, they have all the modern electronic gears and all the personnel. They're much better prepared than we are. I mean, we're just, you know, ordinary citizens.
Professor Wong believes the INS and many Americans are too quick to point a finger at Chinese Americans.
If you were to read the local paper here in San Francisco Bay Area, you think that there are millions of Chinese invading into the United States and taking over the new yellow peril. That's what we have.
The head of Chinese Newcomers Service is more concerned about how the INS comments reflect on Chinese Americans.
People like us, we work hard day in and day out. We don't have any knowledge about that. If Mr. Ilkert has that kind of information, I think he should actually let us know.
So some people in this area were upset by his remarks?
Yes, including me.
You were upset about this?
Yes, because that creates a not a good image on all of us.
In response to the well-publicized smuggling incidents, the administration, the INS, and Congress are all moving toward tougher immigration laws and more sophisticated enforcement. In America's Chinatowns, while the smugglers get no sympathy, the fear is the country may be overreacting because the illegals are Chinese.
Again, the main stories of this Wednesday. The G7 leaders announced a trade deal that would eliminate or reduce tariffs on a broad range of manufactured goods. Rain and flooding continued along the Mississippi River. Federal officials said damage had topped $1 billion, and they promised to begin providing emergency disaster relief. On the NewsHour tonight, a top Weather Service meteorologist said the rain could continue for another month. Good night, Roger.
Good night, Robin. Before we end tonight, we have a correction. In last night's introduction to the report on breast implants, we said that 2 million women had had surgery to remove their implants because of a Food and Drug Administration warning. That figure was wrong. We should have said that 2 million had had implants, but only some had them removed after the government warning. That's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Roger Mudd. Thank you and good night.
Major